morning. 3 minutes after 10 is the time. It hits you sometimes, doesn't it? It's a news bulletin. The way that it juxtaposes stories together and affords them, in a sense, similar weight. And indeed, the newspapers do the same. So you've got that story there about the cost of living crisis, about food. It goes further. Some research published today shows that the scarcity of affordable, healthy food is so acute in some of the poorest parts of Birmingham, Liverpool, Bradford, Durham and the Welsh valleys that the vast majority of neighbourhoods in these areas should be getting targeted help. And that's from the consumer organisation Which. 37% of neighbourhoods with poor access to good value food in some Yorkshire areas such as Bradford. And then in the same news bulletin, and indeed in the same newspapers and the same news agenda today, we learn that the Queen Consort has got a new cipher, which is the sort of symbol that she'll have on her letterheads and, I don't know, her carriages. That's not just me, is it? So sometimes it really does sit a little bit oddly, the unfolding pageant of British life. So you've got millions of people facing food poverty. You've got huge swathes of the country turning into effective food deserts because healthy, affordable food is so hard to get hold of. And we've got a new cipher, just sort of ranking up in the same news level. Sometimes it hits me. Most of the time it washes over you, doesn't it? Like so much froth. But sometimes it really hits you that the inequality in this country isn't just sort of kind of built on income or wealth. It's an intrinsic part of the country. We're built on epic inequality, and we never notice it. It's so normalised. It's so completely normal that we never notice it. The scale of it. Talk about the elephant in the room, but it's not the elephant in the room. It's the room itself. The room is made of it. It's breathtaking. I haven't got a particular axe to grind on this. I've got no particular beef with the Queen Consort. But that just really, really struck me, probably because Simon Conway's delivery is so superb as well, the way that his news bulletins just sort of, almost by a process of osmosis, you find yourself absorbing their content because his delivery is so dulcet. But that just really stopped me in my tracks there. In the same breath, segueing effortlessly from tales of food poverty to the fact that King Charles's wife has got a new symbol to stick on her letters and her letterheads. Anyway, that's not what we're talking about today, unless you particularly want to. I thought we'd return to the vexed question of climate protest because so listen, don't think ill of me, all right? Sometimes I prefer it when I can't remember by 2 o'clock. The kids come home from school at 4 o'clock. They say, "What do you do on the show today?" And I actually can't remember. Those in some ways are my favourite days, where nothing has landed, nothing has stuck. Nothing is haunting me. Also, obviously, I'm getting old. And I can't remember what I had for breakfast. But I like those days. I like this. But because, of course, some days, and I presume it's the same for you if you're paying attention. If you've just got me burbling away in the background or to keep the cat company, then this won't apply. But if you approach the programme with a modicum of concentration, I presume that it's similar for you. Some of the stuff just sticks, doesn't it? Some of the stuff just resonates and lodges itself in your consciousness, in your thoughts. And a lot of the stuff doesn't. Yesterday really did. And it was odd because it was a topic that we've done before. It was subjects that we'd done before. And it just landed slightly differently for me. I think of that young woman, Louise, who's had the Daily Mail treatment today. Listen, if your kids are going to be climate protesters, or indeed if you are listening to this and you're thinking of taking public action, whether or not you see these people as sort of latter-day suffragettes or whether you see them as an enormous pain in the proverbials, if your kids or if you are thinking of doing this, just put all your social media on private immediately before you do anything. Otherwise, they will be trawling through your Facebook pages, your friends' Facebook pages, desperately looking for any photograph of you that could be used to portray you as less than serious and undeserving of the most basic human courtesies. So the 24-year-old woman, Louise, has been fully Daily Mailed today. They've even found a picture of her holding 2 glasses of wine, would you believe? And they've dug into her backstory and discovered that she is something of a singer-songwriter. All of this profoundly relevant to the climate crisis and obviously deeply, deeply significant in the context of the issues that she was trying to draw attention to yesterday. But the the simple lesson there for anybody contemplating any form of protest against anything at all is to lock up your social media if you don't want them to go through it with a fine tooth comb, looking for something that may be construed as embarrassing. So Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the United Nations, warned yesterday that the world was on a highway to climate hell. He urged leaders to work together to cut emissions or condemn future generations to catastrophe. And here's the thing, right? What did you notice more? The General Secretary, or the Secretary General even, of the United Nations warning that the world is on a highway to hell, or a 24-year-old woman who was once photographed holding 2 glasses of wine, climbing up a gantry on the M25 and bringing thousands of commuters to an unwanted standstill? That's the problem, or the point. You may not see it as a problem. I'm not sure I do. What did you notice more? What had the bigger impact on you? The people, and they've done it again this morning, so we don't need to focus on Louise, although I found her tearful testimony yesterday quite arresting. Speaking of arresting, we will be getting on shortly to the question of why 8 people have been, it would appear, preemptively arrested today. That's all a little bit Minority Report, isn't it? But what did you notice more? Because this is, it seems to me, the point you cannot pass. The General Secretary, or the Secretary, I've got a mind blip now, haven't I? It's the Secretary General, he's not Mick Lynch. The Secretary General of the United, I'm going to turn all, Gilbert and Sullivan now, I'm going to start singing it. He was the very model of a modern Secretary General. No, stop it now. All right, the Secretary General of the United Nations is quite a big cheese. He's quite a big deal. He's quite a big player on the world stage. Humanity, he said, has a choice. Cooperate or perish. I mean, the warning is stark. You can probably still find a Daily Telegraph columnist or a presenter on one of those weird new television stations claiming that the scientists don't know what they're talking about and nobody needs to panic. But everybody, with even a scintilla of comprehension on these issues, is now almost unanimous in this warning, this scale of warning. Humanity has a choice. Cooperate or perish. And yet I don't think you'd have noticed that speech. This is the first you've heard of it. And you're not stupid. You know, by dint of the fact that you tune into this particular radio station, you demonstrate an interest in current affairs, albeit an interest in current affairs, or indeed current affairs that are slightly distorted by the lenses of your favourite presenters. We choose the topics we're going to talk about. We don't choose what goes into the news bulletin, but you will know a little bit more about the things that Nick and me and Sheila and everybody else find interesting by dint of the fact that that's how, well, certainly that's how I work. I can't speak for anybody else. I talk every day about the stuff I find most interesting. And there it is. You will not be aware, or you will be nowhere near as aware of the United Nations Secretary General's apocalyptic warning yesterday as you are about the people who have climbed up onto a motorway gantry and brought commuters' traffic to a standstill. So if the simple task is to draw attention to the issue, then stopping traffic on the M25 is a more effective intervention than being the Secretary General of the United Nations and delivering an apocalyptic speech in front of pretty much every world leader on the planet. Just think about that for a minute. That's the problem. That's the craziness of this issue, right? Every world leader on the planet, give or take, is in Sharm el-Sheikh today. Even Rishi Sunak went eventually after insisting that he wouldn't and sending Therese Coffey around the studios to claim that it was just a gathering of people and didn't really mean anything. Even Boris Johnson turned up there to save his career. To save the planet. All the world leaders of note are there. Sunak and Macron, new best friends. I don't know if you've seen the photographs. It looks like a reunion of a 25-year-old boy band. It's quite sweet, actually. Both very well groomed, aren't they? All the world leaders worth a mention. Pretty much, you know, or certainly all the leaders of the free world gathering in one spot to discuss climate crisis, to come up with solutions to our fossil fuel addiction, to look at crises that are posing an existential threat to our species. The planet will be fine. Planet will recover. It's the species that we're talking about. And it gets less attention. It secures less attention than people climbing on a motorway gantry and bringing commuter traffic to a standstill. Now, there it is. There is the problem. I haven't asked you a question yet. I don't know if I can say, how would you solve that problem? Should we do that? I mean, it's only Tuesday. You should still have a little bit of bounce, a little bit of petrol in your tank. How do you solve that problem? What can these people do? Because here's the thing, right? What would you do to save your child's life? To understand these protesters, and I'm not on the same page yet. I'm really not. And I know that I should be. And I have two ways of going. I'm not going to labour this point because I got told off about it yesterday by a very, very good caller over in Thursford in Norfolk. But I will just remind you that I understand the mental impulse at this fork in the road. You know that they're right. You know that what they're doing is necessary and urgent. And unless you've got a better idea, you can't really disapprove of them in good conscience, which means you choose bad conscience. You start slagging them off. You start calling them unhelpful. But what they've done has drawn more attention to this issue than a speech in front of every leader in the free world delivered by the Secretary General of the United Nations, warning in apocalyptic terms of what is on the road ahead of us unless we take drastic action soon. So how do you solve that problem? How do you solve the very simple problem that these people protesting on the M25 today have managed to garner more attention, more headlines and more coverage than the Secretary General of the United Nations delivering a speech in the company of every leader in the free world warning that if we don't act soon, we will be, in fact, no, we are already on a highway to hell. Warning that humanity has a choice, cooperate or perish. What are those kids up that gantry saying? Sorry, they're not kids. What are those people up that gantry saying? We will perish if we do not do something now. But we ignore the Secretary General of the United Nations, and we are encouraged by all the people who told you Brexit would be brilliant. Boris Johnson was a stand-up guy. Refugees are the real problem facing his country. 12 years of Tory rule has absolutely nothing to do with the state of the NHS or the police or the schools or the borders or whatever it may be. All of those people doffing their caps, tugging their forelocks, shilling furiously for the vested interests of media owners, newspaper owners. They're telling you to hate on these people doing the protests. So what gives? And the crucial point to understand is that they are screaming about our home being on fire. The home we all share is on fire, and they are screaming about it. And some of the most powerful voices in the Western world are screaming back at them to shut up and ignore the flames. What else can they do? 0345 6060973. And what can we do about this fundamental problem? The fact that a 24-year-old woman up a gantry on the M25 will attract more attention, more coverage, more, quotes, news, end quotes, than a speech in a room containing the most powerful people on the planet, delivered by the Secretary General of the United Nations, warning in no uncertain terms that unless we change right now, we will perish. How do we do that? And crikey, I've got questions coming out my ears this morning. But at the heart of it is there any other way? Is there any other way? And can I reach you, even if you're stuck there, even if you're furious, even if you've got screaming kids in the back of the car, even if you're going to miss something really important like a funeral or a hospital appointment? Is there any way that these people can impress upon you the urgency of this situation if we're going to ignore the speeches and focus so furiously upon the direct action? Stuart in Tiptree just texted to say, it's easy, James. Just don't look up. And he's right, isn't he? The problem is, and referring back to that film from last Christmas, the problem is it's not just don't look up. It's the energy and the expense that is then put into telling everybody not to look up. And it's still out there. That's the enemy. That's the counterweight. That's the opponent to these people on the gantries. It's the most powerful institutions in this country have spent 20, 30 years telling you that there's nothing to worry about. I saw someone on Question Time. They used to work here, actually saying there's nothing to worry about. There's no such thing. This was last week or the week before. And you sort of, you can't quite believe your ears, even though you're aware of how boneheaded some of these so-called commentators and professional contributors to public discourse are. The idea that we would still have people now on the BBC's flagship discussion programme saying, oh, no such thing, don't worry about it. It's incredible. And yet, when these people climb these gantries, stop these commuters, then we talk about it. So what else could they do? And how do we fix the problem of them getting all the attention while the United Nations Secretary General merits barely a whisper? It's 10:19. 22 minutes after 10 is the time to protest or not to protest. And if not to protest, then what? And I can't resist this comparison of the United Nations Secretary General speaking at COP27 in Egypt to most of the leaders of the free world and getting less attention than the people who have brought the M25 to a standstill for 2 days in the southeast of England. 23 minutes after 10. How do you fix that? Ruben's in Liverpool. Ruben, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Thanks for having me on. I don't think there is a way to change it except for direct action and protest. I mean, like you say, you can stand up in front of the world leaders and you can give a speech about what's going to happen in the future, but these dates and these targets that we set for 2030, or 15 years ago we were setting targets for 2020, and that's been and gone, and they don't change anything, and they're too far in the future. It's too much of an abstract concept for people to think about a climate crisis which is gradually happening, and we're like a frog boiling in a pot of water. This direct action affects people's daily lives. It affects them today, and that's, of course it irritates them. But that's the whole point of protest. It is to make an impact now, so that hopefully more people will put pressure on the government, and it will have a real impact on policy. Because
words are cheap, and if you want the politicians to act, they're going to have to be pushed into it.
Well, they're going to have to be pushed into it. But I mean, it's a case for everyone. Humanity, as a species, partly by design, I think, particularly amongst the working class. We don't have we're not in the position to look 5 years into the future, let alone 15 years into the future. Obviously, people think about their kids and their grandkids, but it's still an abstract concept when you're thinking that far ahead, when today you need to think about how you're getting food on the table or whether you can pay your bills. So it's very difficult to think about something that's going to be happening in 20 years' time.
I understand that, of course I do, but this makes it harder for people to put food on the table. Let me read you a text that's just come in while you were talking. First time in a long time I've got in touch. I just want to say I'm on a very low wage. I'm self-employed. Any day I don't work is too much for me to lose due to this disruption. Why don't they stop McDonald's selling beef? Why not stop the fuel distributors? Why don't they target milk farmers? I understand why they're doing what they're doing. I honestly do. But I feel they're going about it in the wrong way. If I know the road is blocked, I won't leave home. I spent 45 minutes yesterday going half a mile. That means my van was running for 45 minutes. How does that help the environment? Multiply it by all the cars that are out there, and how can this be helping?
I mean, obviously that is an issue, and for many individual people, I appreciate that it's going to impact their lives. But like I said, firstly, that is the point of protest. Yes. It is inconvenient, and it does make everyone's lives more difficult. But at the end of the day, this is an existential crisis for the whole of humanity.
I don't dispute that. What does success look like then from the point of view of these protests? Success looks like governments agreeing to do essentially what Antonio Guterres, the United Nations Secretary General, was calling upon them to do in Sharm el-Sheikh yesterday. But of course, Joe Biden isn't even there. So, the idea that America and China, who are the largest economies in the world, have to show leadership, well, it all feels a little bit hollow and flaccid, doesn't it, if they're not part of these conversations?
It does feel hollow, but I think like the protesters on the M25, they have a current goal, which is obviously to stop the government from renewing and giving out new contracts for oil and gas. But I mean, I think that is the key issue: is what can we do now? What government policy are we going to enact this year? Not what target are we going to put for 2030? Because, like I say, I mean, I remember when I was in school, I did my GCSEs in, 2010, 2011. I studied the sciences then. We were talking about climate change then. and the government was setting targets for what we were going to reduce emissions by for 2020. You know, like we've been having these COPs; they've been going on for
it's just all unrolling,
and
it's all and the sense that these big summits provide politicians with a sense of doing something or making meaningful interventions, but the view from the top of a gantry on the M25 this morning would look rather different. And indeed, the view from behind the wheel of our correspondent's van would look rather different as well. Why is he being hurt in order to draw attention to this issue? The problem is with so much of our lives, really, our coverage of issues, our politics, our existences. The problem is this myth that it's impossible to be two things at the same time. There's some stories in the newspaper yesterday about Winston Churchill, and you just know that by the time it's been popped up on breakfast television, it's going to be something like hero or villain, as if it's impossible for somebody to do good things and bad things in the course of the same lifetime. You have to be ideologically pure and perfect, or you have to be a complete wrong'un. So these conversations are not about goodies and baddies. They're not about heroes and villains. They should be, and this is where we fail, they should be about shared priorities. And if the Secretary-General of the United Nations is essentially singing from the same hymn sheet as the protesters up the gantry on the M25 and governments are doing nothing, I don't see how you can criticise one and not criticise the other. And the one you should be criticising the least is the one who's garnering the most attention for the cause. It's just me thinking out loud. I could well be wrong. John's in Nuneaton. John, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello, John.
This climate change issue, unless it's dealt with globally as a whole community of humanity, it's never going to work.
Well, that's what Antonio Guterres said yesterday.
Absolutely.
But so you can only, as an individual, you can only really exert pressure on your own society and your own government, can't you?
Yeah, well, I'm thinking back when Theresa May said 6 years ago that if you're a citizen of the world, you're a citizen of nowhere.
Yeah, that was unfortunate.
That was not just unfortunate, that was a death knell. Because if you say that sort of thing, then what's the hope for any global coordination to deal with the climate change?
Well, I suppose that the hope would be that every individual country has its own forces of protest and forces of good that do engender collective action by dint of it being a combination of individual action. So, there'll be people in France and there'll be people in Germany, unlikely in China because they probably get bashed over the head. But there'll be people all over the world moving towards the same goal, even though they are not moving as a homogenous force. I'm not as pessimistic as you about that.
Yeah, I agree that's the case. But the United Nations, which is the organisation that's there to do this, yes, so often seems to be ineffective.
Yes, it does.
I think all the nations of the world, all the people of the world, every individual, me, you, everybody, ought to be fully supporting the idea of some global response. I mean, there are some people talk about, the evils of world government, but that's, in a sense, that's the only way we can have a collective attack on the difficulties that we're in. It's a global issue.
Because if one country essentially compromises its profitability by doing something for the good of the planet, there'll be another country over there that goes in the opposite direction in order to make large short-term profits. And so unless they're somehow bound by the same conventions, unless they're part of the same process, then it's doomed to fail.
Yeah. I mean, I think the huge sacrifice we in the rich West have got to make, and the rich North, if you will, is to support those other countries who are desperate to work in old-fashioned ways which ruin the climate. We've got to help them out. It's not just they've got to do it, we've got to help them. And that is one of the issues that they've brought forward.
It is, and that is perhaps inevitably, like night following day, that is the thing that the Daily Mail is currently having a fit of the vapours about, the notion. They've even sort of tried to introduce that word reparations with all the connotations of slavery and empire into the conversation. And the most simple point to make here is if you are somebody who has been successfully groomed to be terrified of refugees, then you should be at the front of the queue of people calling for countries most affected by climate change to receive help from wealthier countries in order to ensure that we don't have exodus after exodus after exodus of climate refugees heading towards countries like the United Kingdom. But I guess that's too difficult for some people to grasp. Thank you. Not you, John. 10:31 is the time. Dominic Ellis is here now with your headlines. 10:36 is the time. This is good from Chris, who's in Brecon. I have zero issue with the protests, and I was stuck in them for 2 hours yesterday. My issue is, what's the actual plan? Lots of great work, research and shifts to a green economy underway, but nobody from government has any sort of detailed plan that we can all see and buy into. Sadly, too many climate deniers on the back benches just have to be kept happy for the Conservatives to stay in power. If they could just show and explain the plan, it would be a huge first step, and have it as some sort of cross-party coalition. I couldn't agree more, actually. That would be wonderful. And yet, of course, Rishi Sunak doesn't even know whether he's coming or going to COP27 literally until the last minute. Said he wouldn't go, comes under pressure, says he will go. Some of that pressure possibly was the revelation that Boris Johnson, remember him, would be going. Crazy. Liz Truss forbade King Charles from going. So the idea that they're taking it seriously is rather hard to sustain when you just look at the rearview mirror, the contents of the rearview mirror from the last month. Never mind the last 10 years. Go back 10 years and you've got David Cameron talking about, I don't know if I can say that word on the radio, but just getting rid of all the green, and then that word for, I can say that word on the radio, but I'm not going to. I'm such a delicate flower. 10:37 is the time. Look it up. 03456060973 is the number you need. I haven't really asked I have asked a specific question about the imbalance between the attention given to the protesters bringing traffic to a standstill and the attention given to the Secretary General of the United Nations. I misspoke a bit with regard to Joe Biden. Of course he couldn't go. He's got the midterms in America, as Dominic just reminded us there during the news bulletin. So that was a fairly stupid thing for me to say. And in fact, his track record on environmental matters is better than any, by some distance, better than any other major world leader in the last 100 years. So just pretend I never said any of that silly stuff about him. It probably still applies to China, though. The problem is, what are these people supposed to do differently? Because you know what's going to happen. The people who get you angry about refugees, the people who get you angry about the European Union, the people who get you angry about, I don't know, the National Trust, the people who get you angry about kneeling footballers, the people who get you angry about statues of slavers being taken down, the people who get you angry about pretty much anything, really, that they turn their attention to, have got you very angry about these protesters, despite the fact that what they're warning about is essentially endorsed by the Secretary General of the United Nations. It is a simple message, a simple choice between cooperation or perishing. And yet, they're top of the list now, public enemy number one. What else could they do? If your house was on fire and you were screaming fire and lots of people were queuing to tell you to shut up and there wasn't really a fire, what would you do? Would you keep screaming? Would you be deterred by the prospect of going to jail? I don't think you would be. That's how they feel. Ash is in Northampton. Ash, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello, Ash.
Good to talk to you again. So I'll give you a bit of background for me again, just to remind everybody. I was a chief officer in the Merchant Navy for 10 years. Working almost exclusively on oil tankers. I then became a teacher, teaching people how to operate oil tankers, work in the oil industry around the world. So I have a little bit of experience of sort of the historical context of oil. So let's go back to the 1970s. Up until the 1970s, the official line from media, government, oil companies around the world was that oil is a naturally occurring substance. If you pump it into the ocean, it will naturally disperse and be reabsorbed into the ground. That was the official line.
It's a bit like smoking being good for your health, isn't it? It's
Absolutely. Now, the reason for this is that look around your studio right now.
Yeah, I know what you're going to do.
I will guarantee there is not a single thing in there that is not made of, created by, delivered by oil.
Even my mug, because it's got paint on it.
Precisely.
Yeah, I was going to reach for my muff. What about my microphone muff? My microphone muff?
Yeah, that will be probably extruded polyester.
Yeah. Newspapers?
Okay, so
newspapers?
Would have been delivered by, the ink has probably got some acrylic in it.
Yeah. All right.
Okay.
You win. Yeah, point taken.
Let's ignore that for the minute, okay? And let's then focus on a scandal much more recent. Who in your audience will have heard of the Glencore scandal?
20 to 30%.
So
tops. And that's a particularly well-informed section of society.
2008 to 2017, Glencore commodities traders were deliberately manipulating the world oil price and have pled guilty in court in May 2022 to having done that.
Yeah.
They're fined $1 billion. That sounds like a lot. But if you had £66 and I fined you £1, would you care?
Well, I can tell you that I would still have £65.
You would still have £65. Yep. and you would just carry on regardless. So now let's take all of that together. The historical, the former oil is just everywhere.
It's like trying to get the eggs out. Taking the world's dependency on oil is like trying to get the eggs out of a baked cake, isn't it? But we have to try, which is why I'm going to nudge you now towards what you think about current protests and what success looks like.
Absolutely love it. Absolutely love the current protests. Because what is everyone now doing?
Talking about it.
Talking about it. They are taking basically a leaf out of the suffragettes and suffragists movement and thinking, if we can just get people talking about it, and they continue to talk about it, and every single week we talk about it.
But does it spread?
Eventually public anger will shift.
Yes, I hope you're right. I think you might be. My inbox is not a scientific experiment by any stretch of the imagination. People are more compelled to express negativity than positivity, but I do have messages telling me that I used to support them and they've put me off. You just have to have faith. They just have to have faith up the gantries. I just have to have faith that for everybody. Here's one, Jonathan in Streatham. Of course climate change is real, but these spoilt children, much like you, are virtue signalling and they are mentally ill, like the girl on the bridge. So for every resident of Idiot's Corner, you have to presume that there's 100 people who are actually susceptible to science and common sense.
So to answer the virtue signalling, okay?
You don't really have to. He's clearly an idiot.
No, it's okay. It's okay. I'll answer it.
Okay, it's very charitable of you.
I was part of the problem.
Yes.
Absolutely. I had to make a living. They were the people that gave me a job as a merchant sailor.
Yeah?
Yep. To call me a child a little bit.
I don't know if he means you. I think he meant the people up the gantry. I don't know what he means. I don't think he knows what he means. He's just regurgitating a Richard Littlejohn column.
What am I now teaching? I'm now teaching people how to move away from oil and move into different areas of generation. Tide generation, wave generation, wind generation, things we've always known about for years. I used to make a joke on the course where I used to teach for oil that if we just put sails back up, that would stop a lot of the issues that we have from people saying that we are one of the major polluters in society from the shipping industry.
Yeah.
If we just put sails back up, the problem with that is it would take 12 weeks to get your delivery from China, not 2. So if people could readjust their things...
Yeah, and just-in-time supply chains and all, that's the second echo of Brexit, isn't it, in the course of this conversation? The one about the eggs, getting the eggs out of a baked cake, and the one about the way the world is built upon just-in-time supply chains.
So it's small incremental changes that are going to create this. A switch to... And if you think they say, well, what about, storage and stuff? Well, that's fine. You get a pump and you pump 1 litre of water 1 metre in the air. And if you keep doing that with all the wind generated, eventually you'd have a water battery enough to power the entire country for a day when it's not windy. It's just having to have thoughts about this. And if you
like hydroelectric power, but using okay. And here's the problem, and I know you know this, but for anybody listening who doesn't, then very simply, the impetus to come up with solutions is, in a capitalist society, going to depend upon profitability. And as long as there is more profit to be made from continuing to extract fossil fuels from the ground and burn them, then you are not going to get the investment that you need. So what governments can do is one of two things. They can either fund the investment that is needed, which I don't think would be the best way to do it, or they can make the extraction of fossil fuels so unprofitable that these vested interests, these massive corporations and organisations that essentially live and breathe filthy lucre, they live on cash, make the cash they can make out of fossil fuels so appetizing and unappealing and difficult that they will be the ones that actually find the ways to solve many of the problems that are posed by the need to wean ourselves off fossil fuels. There you go, that's the end of my TED Talk, with a little bit of help from Ash. It's 10 to 11. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I sort of get getting a bit teased by the youths on Capital Breakfast this morning. I don't know if anybody heard it. My excitement yesterday about the announcement that Coldplay are going to be playing at the Jingle Bell Ball on Saturday night has prompted Roman Kemp and co. to accuse me of angling for tickets. I tell them, don't they? When you've been in this game as long as I have, you've been a loyal servant of this company, you don't have to beg for tickets to the magnificent Jingle Bell Ball. Outrageous slur upon both my integrity and my professionalism. I shall be having words. But not until I've finished with the conversation about climate change, which moves next to West Virginia in America, where John is calling from Point Pleasant. What a delightful sounding place that is, John.
Good morning, James. How are you this morning?
Very well indeed. What's on your mind?
Well, first of all, I just want to give you a quick thank you. I've been listening to you for about a year, and I was exposed to British culture at an early age through Douglas Adams.
Gosh.
And now I've also got 2 of your books and the Mystery Hour board game on my shelf. So I want to thank you for those as well.
Well, I'm so honoured to be in the same breath as Douglas Adams, so thank you. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome, sir. I live in an area that has the nickname of the Chemical Valley.
Oh.
Within 50 miles of me, there are multiple petrochemical and plastics processing plants pumping out untold amounts of pollutants into our rivers. I can see the Ohio River from my deck. I live right on the river.
Right.
And science is not big in West Virginia, unfortunately. I'm a pretty well-educated bloke, but most of my contemporaries around here are not.
Okay.
Now, I'm a 50-year-old bachelor, no kids, and I'm absolutely petrified for what's coming. And you say, what does success look like? I'm not sure we can achieve a kind of success that we're after, because we're going to need 8 billion people acting in total unison in concert to solve this problem in time to do anything meaningful. And we've never been able to do that with anything. And the problem around here, James, is people want the jobs.
Yeah.
A lot of people around here, like I said, they're not very well educated. Most of them don't have college degrees. The only well-paying jobs they can get are in the factories and the plants. We've got a company called Nucor. It's a steel plant that's just about ready to move in. They've been fined in the past for environmental violations. Right. But people around here can make 100,000 quid working in one of these places.
Yeah, and so any threat to close off that pipeline of cash and employment is an existential threat to these people. And I sense you have sympathy for them, quite rightly, because, you know, anyone comes along and tells you that your livelihood is under threat, then your first reaction is going to be visceral, isn't it? Not philosophical.
That's true, but still my sympathy is limited to the fact that we're all in this together, and we're all going to swirl down the drain together.
But you keep mentioning education, though, which is pertinent, isn't it? Because there's a willfulness to the resistance among educated people to this, whereas...
Well, quite honestly, there's nothing else around here for these people to do in terms of employment, in terms of being able to take care of their families. This is what they've got, so this is what they're working with. And that's where my sympathy comes into, is for the kids, their kids.
Yeah,
but my sympathy is also directed more to the fact that their kids might want to be able to take a deep breath when they're 60, just like yours might want to.
Yeah.
And I don't have kids. I don't really have as much skin in this game as other people might. But I'm absolutely petrified at what's coming, and I'm afraid that there's mass migration. I heard Andrew Marr last night mention it. And I don't know what you know. You're well tuned into America. I'm in a red state.
Sure.
You've seen how Trump has whipped up these idiots, these morons. What I'm afraid of is when these people try to migrate to America, they're going to be met with a red state welcome, which isn't very good.
And then it doesn't matter how insular and isolated your worldview is. This becomes. Well, I can understand your trepidation. It could be absolutely horrible, depending on what the political climate is like. But if there is environmental climate causing an exodus of refugees, then the reception they're going to receive in the safe parts of the world, judging by the current tone of these conversations, is going to be hideous. Absolutely hideous.
They'd receive a warm welcome from me personally.
Yes, of course.
But I know half the country over here. We're so polarized, both of our countries, and I'm afraid of that because despite the mistakes our countries have made in the past, James, I tend to think of us as the twin pillars of civilization.
Yeah.
If one of our countries is off the rails, the other one can't be. And you saw how dangerous the world tipped when we had Trump and Boris leading our two countries at the same time. It almost went completely off the rails, and we're still teetering.
No ballast, no balance. And you're right. I mean, it's certainly not... we're not in the recovery zone yet. And you're in a very red state, for the record, for people not familiar
yes, I am.
with American politics. Why, just briefly, just your thoughts on this question. Why did they go hand in hand? Why would the support for fossil fuels, the support for the industries, go hand in hand with the fear of refugees or the racist rhetoric that why does it land so well? Because they don't outwardly have much in common.
Well, I'm a musician and I'm a multiculturalist. I'm an internationalist in my thinking. I tend to think I'm not a racist because I believe pretty much we're a human race, and that's where it stops for me.
Sure.
We tend to we love the niche issues. We love to divide ourselves into little camps and yell back and forth and whinge about whose fault this is.
Yeah.
But, I was exposed to many cultures from an early age as a musician. And I tend to look and see what we have in common and see how we can help each other out. But a lot of people around here, and basically in my entire country, we're isolated by two oceans. And if people start coming across the pond and they don't look like us, they don't sound like us, and they don't think like us, they don't eat our food, they don't watch our TV, they don't laugh at our jokes. I'd rather laugh at your jokes than ours.
That's desperate.
I don't know how my fellow citizens will react to that. You already see what happens in Texas, New Mexico, Arizona. They whip up the immigration frenzy. The Mexicans are coming. They're all druggies. Most of them aren't druggies. These guys have kids. They're trying to find a job. They'd be willing to pick fruit. It's not like we're going to do it. Lazy, whinging Americans, lazy, whinging Brits. Neither one of us want to pick our fruit.
It's all there, isn't it? It's all there.
Yeah,
I share your fears. Go on.
But I'm just afraid for what's coming is that hundreds of millions, if not maybe a couple of billion people are going to die because the droughts, the countries are drying out, the rivers are drying up. I mean, there was a plan to pump water from our Mississippi River out west. They're like, great, that'll work. Now the Mississippi's drying up. My brother works out on the river on the barges, transporting goods out there. They can't run the Mississippi this winter.
Good grief. You'd think things like that would land. You'd think things like that would land. But I've got to crack on. Before you go, shall I cheer you up slightly? Would you like to hear something funny?
I would love to, James.
Are you familiar with Wandsworth?
Yes.
Do you know that there is a Point Pleasant in Wandsworth?
I vaguely recall that. I'll cheer you up in return. Did you know that my town is the home of the mythical Mothman?
No, I didn't know that. I don't even know what.
Look that one up if you don't know what it is.
I'm going to look it up.
I'm going to spotted here years ago. So look that up if you want to laugh. And it was great talking to you, James.
Likewise.
You have a good day, brother.
We'll talk again. Stay safe, John. 10:57 is the time. Margaret's in Kendal in the Lake District. Margaret, what would you like to say?
Hello. You were talking about what we can do at the moment,
Yes.
other than getting up on gantries. And to be honest, as I see it, this is really desperate times. It's a last resort. I've just spent 6 weeks in prison for protesting against new oil and gas licenses. I've just got home.
Good grief. How are you? Take your time.
Sorry?
How are you?
Well,
Good.
I'm all right. I would be a lot better though if something actually happened as a result of all the efforts and sacrifices that people are making.
Of course.
I really applaud the people who've got up on those gantries because that is a terrifying, scary thing to do.
I presume you've broken a High Court injunction several.
Yeah, I broke it 4 times.
4 times.
But as far as I'm concerned, that is just not morally or ethically binding. And as far as I see it, the people who are the criminals are the governments who are pushing us forward into disaster. They're not protecting us as they should. So I want to ask you, what else do you think we can do?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not critical of the protesters, for what it's worth. I worry now, and I think the conversation later in the week, if not later today, is going to move to the prosecution of protest, which is getting worse. I mean, you've already been in prison for 6 weeks, and so the idea that the system isn't strict enough, isn't nasty enough, isn't robust enough is pretty hard to swallow.
And I'd like to...
Go on, take all the time you want.
No, I was just going to say that the other thing I'd really like to say in respect of that is it's not going to be a deterrent because we're looking at, an existential threat. We're looking at the end of life for our future generations. But the other thing that I really noticed when I was in prison is that the system is completely broken.
Inside.
It can't accommodate. Yeah. It just can't take the numbers of people that the government are thinking of putting in there. It doesn't work. It's not supporting vulnerable people.
Yeah.
It can hardly function. So it's just not the answer. The answer is to actually stop the new round of gas and oil licenses.
And it is that simple. Well, at first glance, I don't know what the ramifications of that would be in terms of economics, and having spoken to John there in Point Pleasant in terms of employment. But goodness me, you've certainly put your money where your mouth is. Would you do it again?
Yes, I would. And I don't say that lightly because 6 weeks in prison, I mean, it's nothing to what some people serve, but it is not a pleasant experience. I'm still recovering from that.
I'm sure.
But I would do it again tomorrow
Gosh.
if it meant that this folly would stop.
And your crime was to protest at a oil terminal?
Yes, I was sitting peacefully outside Kingsbury Oil Terminal.
Sitting peacefully,
so
but preventing the egress and ingress of vehicles?
Yes, but that was a very targeted protest. But
no, I understand. I just want the detail, that's all. I just want to be clear.
Yeah. I mean, I would also, I have no problem with public disruption. It's horrible. I hate doing it, but I will do it because I think it's the only way that we will get noticed at this stage. And really, we have to do whatever we can.
And there it is.
Really desperate.
There it is. That sense of urgency and emergency that is. I mean, the twain has to meet. You can't sit there saying, "Oh, there's nothing to worry about." Putting people on question time, saying, "Oh, there's nothing to worry about." You could debate the science, but you can't deny it. And until that simple point is understood, I think that Margaret becomes a heroine, really, for this cause. And people say, oh, yeah, they're all virtue signalling. You go and do 6 weeks in prison for something you believe in, for the benefit of others, and then come back and tell me who the virtue signaller is. Honestly. It's 1 minute after 11. 5 minutes after 11 is the time. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I'm going to read you a text just as the last word on the last topic. I'm going to read you a text from Alan in Whitstable because it's so dumb it's hilarious. I wonder if when I read it out, Alan will be able to appreciate just how hilarious he has unintentionally been this morning. Stop defending these brainwashed idiots who are disrupting public life. Shame on you. The next thing you'll be doing is comparing them to the suffragettes. It needs to be stopped with force. Writes Alan in Whitstable. I mean, are you going to tell him or am I? Yeah. Oh, dear. Do stay away from scissors, Alan, won't you? 6 minutes after 11 is the time. We turn our attention next to... Well, do you know, I have staff now who were barely born when I started doing this job. Would you believe that? It's not you, Keith, no, clearly. But I would have to actually check. People say things like, were you on air when ID cards were a thing? And I say, yes, I was. And they say, oh, really? I was in year 2 or something like that. And it was under New Labour, wasn't it? It was when David Blunkett was Home Secretary that there were a lot of conversations and a very real sense that ID cards would become a thing. It also prompted one of the most wincingly brilliant jokes I have ever seen on television from Paul Merton on Have I Got News For You, which I think that perhaps the world has now changed so much I'm wary of repeating it on the radio, but it was, and I have definitely repeated it before, and probably I will again, but I'll leave you to wonder what it was. And indeed, it is a Labour politician who has raised the possibility of some very basic ID cards as a way of counting how many people there are in Britain and perhaps reducing illegal immigration. It's Stephen Kinnock, ironically enough, given that we're going back into the archives of the Labour Party, and his father, of course, is a titan of the Labour movement, Neil. And he's shadow immigration minister now, suggesting that an identity scheme was being looked at very, very carefully indeed. Now, I'm going to ask you what you think about this, and you can come at it from whatever angle you please. Here's, just for the record, here's my worry about this stuff, about all of this stuff. People who aren't racist, right? I don't think they properly understand what racism is. I mean, there's one of the fellas who was knocking about with Farage during the referendum today, describing the French as our enemies. They don't, you know, they start off talking about Eastern Europeans moving in next door to you or speaking foreign on trains, but proper xenophobes, let's say, rather than racist. They just hate foreigners. That's what the word means. Anybody who doesn't look and sound exactly like them, they hate. Unless, of course, the person who doesn't look like them puts an immense amount of effort into trying to sound like them, in which case they will be tolerated and possibly even championed. But when the Labour movement turns its attention to an issue like so-called illegal immigration, they think that they can assuage the fears of people by taking them seriously. Now, I don't know how many members of the public who are currently frightened of asylum seekers are assuageable. I think the only way to assuage these fears is to not fan them. The only way you can extinguish these flames is by not fanning them. I don't think you can extinguish them with a fire extinguisher. I think you can only extinguish them by denying them the oxygen that they need to burn. And that involves, essentially, controlling the media, which is neither desirable in the greater scheme of things nor possible in the current world we inhabit. You're never going to be able to stop right-wing blowhards from getting big pickups and big reactions to scaremongering and hatred stoking of foreigners. They go up and down. You know, when Farage was heading down to Dover with his Fisher-Price binoculars to rub his thighs at the sight of desperate people in dinghies washing up on our beaches, for a long time he was ignored. But then Kwasi Kwarteng and Liz Truss blew up the economy, and the Tory party desperately needed to point at something to distract you from the absolute catastrophe they've inflicted on the country in the short term, never mind the long term. And lo and behold, the asylum seekers and the refugees are at the front of the queue. No matter that these are exactly the same people that told you that by imposing economic sanctions on ourselves, we would somehow become a country that was able to reduce or curtail this sort of traffic. In fact, we made it worse by Brexiting. But facts don't matter. This is my point about xenophobia. The Labour Party thinks that facts can help dilute feelings that aren't built on facts. And I think it's really dangerous and quite frightening that they're considering ID cards as a way of assuaging or addressing public concerns about so-called illegal immigration. Stephen Kinnock has said it would be so helpful in reassuring the public that we, quotes, have control of our borders. But it won't, you know. It won't. It doesn't work like that. Even if we had ID cards, you would find someone claiming that they're being sold out the back of the Dog and Duck, or that person over there with dark skin can't possibly be here legally because ... There was something on Twitter the other day, I don't know if you saw it, about someone claiming her cousin had seen an asylum seeker in a newsagent spending £100 on a government-funded credit card on scratch cards. That stuff gathers pace, you know. I wish it didn't, but just look at the numbers. It gathers pace. These lies are so seductive. They are so intoxicating. And I don't think those of us who can see that they're lies will ever fully understand how intoxicating they are. So the idea of bringing in an ID card at a time when, incidentally, the police, trust in the police is at an all-time low for a variety of very public and obvious reasons. The way individual officers have behaved, the institutional toxicity at the heart of many police services, it doesn't engender a great deal of confidence in their ability to use this new power responsibly and fairly. But the Labour Party, I think, Stephen Kinnock in particular, I think, believes that it would somehow dilute negative feelings that aren't built on facts. And that's my initial word on it. Most countries have ID cards. Loads of European countries, loads of EU member states have forms of ID. So we'll do the civil liberties conversation as well this hour. 0345 6060973 will be the number that you need. But I just wanted to get that out there because it worries me. It worries me quite a lot when people think that they have to address the concerns of xenophobes, of xenophobia, or of people who aren't themselves xenophobes but who have been groomed and gaslit by xenophobes into thinking that foreigners are a threat. I don't think you can fix that feeling with facts. I don't think an ID card or quotas or a points-based immigration system, none of these things will actually work. Listen, I could well be wrong, and I really hope I am, but I see it as a bottomless pit. All right? I see xenophobia or racist rhetoric as a bottomless pit into which it doesn't matter what you throw, what good people throw things, how much they throw in. It's bottomless. It's not going to touch the sides. Because if your political attitude is built upon a hatred of people who don't look like you or sound like you, then as long as there are people who don't look like you or sound like you in this country, you're going to be susceptible to the toxicity that some politicians... One of them stood up in the House of Commons yesterday and claimed that his constituents in Blackpool would dream of living in the circumstances at the Manston Processing Centre. I mean, that's beyond stupid. That's disgustingly dangerous language. A week and a day after a terrorist attack upon a similar processing centre, a man called Scott Benton stands up and claims that his constituents dream of living in the conditions that asylum seekers endure in the Manston Processing Centre. That's how ugly this is. That's how gross it is. That's how seductive and intoxicating it is. But that's just me. That's just me, all right? And that may be a very small part of the broader conversation that we're going to have now, because I just want to ask you straight up, all right? What do you think about the idea of forcing everyone to apply for registration and carrying an ID card? What do you think of it? Okay, and I'd quite like some positive voices as well on this one. I don't know. Is my honest answer to you. I don't think it will do what Stephen Kinnock is suggesting it would do, but it would help with some other things. It would actually allow people to prove their presence is legal, if you like. It must be awful to be suspected or accused or things like that. You've got ID cards everywhere from Sweden right across Northern Europe, but what do you think of this? 0345 6060 973. And bear in mind, I'm asking you this question on a day when people are now being arrested for plans to protest or suspicions of plans to protest. Where does that go? Hit the numbers now. You will get through. I don't know why the phone lines have exploded. Have I done something wrong? Have I misspoken? Have I got the day wrong or something like that? I haven't even asked a question yet or given a call to arms. And yet there's barely a phone line into the bill. So grab it quickly while you can on the usual number. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. And we'll find out whether the mere mention of ID cards has just prompted a cavalcade of callers to the programme, or whether I have accidentally said the day wrong or committed a major faux pas that everyone is ringing up to point out. Find out after this. 19 minutes after 11 is the time. I've got two plates spinning this hour, really. It's a good old-fashioned phone-in about ID cards, which I honestly, I think I was in short trousers the last time we had that. But it's also, and I don't know whether you'll be up for this bit of it, because it's a bit me, isn't it? It's also the idea that the Labour Party, or Stephen Kinnock, the shadow immigration minister, thinks that he can dilute xenophobic feelings by providing facts. So the idea that ID cards would make it harder to work here illegally, and therefore public disquiet about so-called illegal immigration would diminish. I just don't know that it would. I've never met anyone who is telling the truth when they say, oh, I'm supremely comfortable with immigration. I just want it to be better controlled. I could be wrong. I could be doing you a grave disservice. But you voted in 2016 to control it better. How did that work out for you? So you seem to be still very cross. Neil's in Stalybridge. Neil, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello, mate.
The thing that worries me about this is we've been here before. I mean, it's like you just said. If we did have ID cards, there's a certain section of the community would say, yeah, but natural-born Brits should have gold ones.
They're not going to get them. They're not going to get them, are they? So we can. I understand the reservation you're expressing, but we can park bits of it on the grounds of plausibility.
Yeah, but that's what I mean. What I'm saying is, we did bring them in. That's where we go. It's like you said. It's the idea.
A bottomless pit argument.
Yeah, and it's where we're heading. And the thing that really is really perplexing me as a Labour member at the moment is, I was listening to an interview with David Yelland.
Yes, the former editor of The Sun.
Yeah. And he basically did say that Starmer's in a unique position with the lead he's got, that he's on course to probably be the first PM in a while, or a very long time, who's not going to need the Sun and the Mail and the Express. He doesn't. Right, so you sort of wonder, why is he still pandering to them?
Is this pandering? Let me read you something from a Polish listener. I'm from Poland, James. I'm now the happy owner of a blue British passport and a red Polish EU one. We have ID cards in Poland. There's nothing wrong with it. It would be very helpful to have them in the UK. Much easier to identify illegal workers, etc. And I do mean illegal workers, not refugees or asylum seekers.
That caveat at the end made that's the point, isn't it? The Polish have a tradition of doing them. It's I think scarily it's probably a throwback from the Soviet era.
Well, I think more of the Great Escape actually, and is it Gordon Jackson who's asked for his papers at the train station and he accidentally replies in English? But here's the problem that I think you're articulating, or part of it is this: illegal workers, people like you and I, worry about them being exploited.
Yeah.
The people that Stephen Kinnock is appealing to here worry about them being almost alive or in this country. So there's nothing in this ID card that actually makes the plight of an exploited, trafficked worker better. They're just more likely to get deported as a result of this, I think.
Well, no, and plus, you're not necessarily going to stop the people smuggled in and stuff like that anyway.
Because they're not going to be the employers that ask to see an ID card before they put you to work in a sweatshop, are they?
Precisely. And, they even have accommodation for them and everything. You're not... I mean, the idea, this is another one of those things where we say it's going to stop, exploitation, but it's not, because, it's not. They're just going to find
Which
a way
means it's
around
not
it
even
anyway.
intended to stop anything. It's just intended to address feelings. And those feelings are, I fear, and I think you agree, that they are a bottomless pit. You cannot reason somebody out of a position that they haven't been reasoned into. And xenophobia is not a position that anybody has ever been reasoned into.
No, and I don't think that the majority of it people think they are either. No. I think they do tend to get more press, and sometimes because they have organs of the state where they can pump out. But I hear you. I hear you. The majority of the people like that.
I don't feel as strongly as you do. I can see the flaws and the particularly in this particular rationale as clearly as you can, but I don't feel. And I'm pretty sure I didn't last time round either. I don't, and I don't feel that negativity, that repulsion that some people do, and you do in a mild way, Neil. But maybe I will by 12 o'clock. Let's find out. Debbie's in Horsham. Debbie, what would you like to say?
Hi, I'd like to have no real objection to ID cards. Right. I do an awful lot of right-to-work checks at work, and there are so many documents that you need from various people for where they've come from, whether they're UK citizens or they come from the EU or outside the EU.
Yeah.
One single document, point of truth, would make my life so much easier.
And in fact, and I didn't realise this was going to happen today, that they've released the ID that you can use to vote. Have you seen this list?
No, I haven't.
It's just come out, I think, in the last 24 hours or so. It may even have been this morning. And it's very, I would say it discriminates, actually, presumably by accident, although you never know, against younger people. The government indeed has, the City Hall editor of My London has tweeted, the government's been accused of gerrymandering and bringing in legalised voter suppression because the mandatory voter ID for next year's May local elections has very little accommodation for younger people. You can use lots of things like bus passes and things that older people have, but none of them are aimed at younger people, and 6 of the government-accepted IDs are specifically targeted at older people. So this would solve that problem as well, wouldn't it? If everybody has an ID card, that could be your voter ID.
And I think with everything the way has gone since Brexit and people travelling abroad far less, I know myself, I'm probably not going to renew my passport when it comes up for renewal.
Really?
I don't need to spend that £100.
Okay. I'm getting 2. I'm getting an Irish one. I'm going the opposite way.
I married incorrectly. I married a purebred.
I could adopt you if you want, Debbie. The Irish one, you get a little credit card as well. You can apply for a little credit card passport. I don't know if you can do that in other countries, but you can carry that around in your wallet, and that's almost like the perfect ID. Although it proves you're Irish, it doesn't actually prove you're British, so I don't know if it would entitle me to vote. Now I come to think of it, that's not the genius move I thought it was.
Check that out.
Yes, and you don't, I mean, just entertain for a moment the kind of slightly oppressive nature of it, or the fact that the Labour Party is talking about using it to calm fears about so-called illegal immigration. That's a different proposition from the one you've rung in to respond to.
It's not going to help people who are coming in illegally and working illegally, as you said to the last caller. They're just not going through that system. They aren't going through the checks. People who are doing these checks are operating legally, and it would just make their lives much easier.
There it is. And of course, if you are working here illegally, but paying national insurance and paying income tax and going through all of the books, it seems to me that would be a very small constituency of people. If you're working illegally, it's almost certainly in cahoots with whoever it is that's paying you. So I don't know what different. I don't know. I mean, I'm not an employer, but it would benefit Debbie, and I don't think it would actually prevent or deter unscrupulous employers from hiring undocumented workers. 27 minutes after 11, and there it is, just crept into my vocabulary there, the word undocumented, which is a little bit chilling in a way, but that is, of course, what ID cards create. Stephen is in Leeds. Stephen, what would you like to say?
I would just like to say, I'm a Jamaican. I've been living in the UK now for over 19 years, and we already have these things. So we have to have an indefinite leave to remain, a biometric passport.
Okay.
It has your. It's like an ID card. It has your picture. It has all your information. You can't get a job without it.
Oh, I didn't know that.
You can't rent a property without it. So basically, it's already in place. So I think this conversation is just another way of just alienating brown people, really. Because if I'm walking on the road with my white friend and the police pull us over, he's not going to ask him for his ID.
No.
He's just going to go, "Show me your ID, mate. You're not from around these parts."
But hang on, just let me pause. Let me have a think, Stephen. Just a respectful think about this, because I understand your objection, but you're making it from the position of already having an ID card.
Yeah.
So why would it be worse if everybody had one?
Yeah, because it wouldn't really make a difference. It's just another conversation. It's just another conversation to go.
But it's not just going to be brown people, and this is not. I'm not arguing with you. I mean, it's going to be anybody with an accent as well, isn't it? It's going to be anybody with a foreign-sounding name.
Yeah.
And then we come to how much trust we have in the police. And oddly, there's another report around today, which was on my list of things we might talk about the discrimination of black people by the police, which remains a major problem. And so it's the people who have the power to demand to see your papers that become the problem, not the existence of the ID card, but the nature of policing in this country.
Yeah, so I mean, I can share one incident I had with the police recently. They pulled me over, stopped, and I'm like, "What? What's the problem?" And he said to me, "I'm not being funny, but Afro-Caribbean males are responsible for most of the crime, Johnny. I've never committed a crime. I'm a hard working. I've got a business. But it's just the fact that they would automatically think."
Well, that's racial profiling, isn't it?
Yeah. So and that's what that this conversation is really, because it's going to affect mainly.
There was a wonderful call we took during lockdown, Stephen, from a female police officer, from a woman police officer, and we were struck by how many people who are normally very comfortable with black people being treated like you were treated by that officer. I'm thinking chiefly of sort of elderly white people in the British media who think stop and search is absolutely fine. And then when during lockdown, police started stopping white people in the park or asking white people to prove that they had the right to be where they were, suddenly all of these people who've been comfortable with stop and search of completely innocent black men like you, because, if you've got nothing to hide, you've got nothing to fear, suddenly they all started having fits of the vapors, mate. They all started having massive sort of hissy fits. And she said this wonderful thing. She said, everyone is supportive of policing until they're the ones being policed.
Absolutely, and this is the problem. We there's something else that we need to sort out. The ID, and people working illegal. There are people, legitimate company that directly employs these people because it saves them money or whatever else. This is not going to stop that at all.
No, so go after them. Go, and also if they identify people who have been exploited and trafficked and put to work illegally, what's going to happen to them? You make some valid points. I'm going to, and obviously your lived experience is going to be different from mine, and therefore it's more pertinent to this particular question than mine is. But I don't know that as we did establish together, extending it to everybody doesn't increase the chances of what you describe happening, given that it's already happening. At least I don't think it does. So there are positives and negatives on this. Leon has been in touch. So I've lived in a country where carrying an ID card is mandatory. It was not an onerous burden. We already have proto-ID cards in the UK, driving licences that many adults have, carries our date of birth, our address and our photo. If it was issued free to all over 16s as an ID card, then the driving licence could simply be an add-on. I don't see a big problem. Where I would object is if such cards were used to control us through links to numerous state databases. Well, how do you get to reassure yourself that isn't happening, Leon? 11:31 is the time. Dominic Ellis is here now with your headlines. 11:36 is the time. Andy Payne makes a point I meant to make but forgot. It's good to hear the debate about ID cards for UK citizens on LBC with that Mr. James O'B. I assume the quotes freedom of speech end quotes lot will object to them whilst also calling for controls on immigration and emigration. And of course, what freedom of speech is in quotes. It means people who don't actually believe in freedom of speech. They believe in the freedom to say whatever they want without ever being criticised or having their lies pointed out. And as we speak about liars, Boris Johnson's honours list has been published, and Nadine Dorries, who routinely used parliamentary privilege to both lie and indeed libel honest citizens of this country, including one of Britain's best-loved broadcasters, your humble presenter, she is going to go into the House of Lords. So's Sean Bailey, who you'll remember had to step down from the Greater London Assembly after being busted at a lockdown party. But I suppose if Boris Johnson is allowed to make an honours list after going to several lockdown parties and being fined for one of them, then it would be a bit unfair not to put Sean Bailey in the House of Lords, despite the fact that he was caught going to a party when you weren't even allowed to visit your mum. Oh, what a time to be alive. Oh, and Gavin Williamson is in even more trouble today than he was yesterday. It turns out that he told... there's an astonishing apology. In fact, I'll tell you what, I'll come back to that a little later because I want to get the facts exactly right. And speaking of facts, here is a list of the ID that the government will accept when you're voting. Now, if you are... let's say that you are under... 30. Just tell me what you make of this. You ready? An older person's bus pass, a disabled person's bus pass, an Oyster 60 Plus card, a Freedom Pass, which is available to people over the age of 66. Passes funded by the Scottish Government. So if you're in Scotland and you're aged between 16 and 22 and you've got the National Entitlement Card, you can use that to vote in Scotland. Passes funded by the Welsh Government, a 60 and over Welsh concessionary travel card or a disabled person's Welsh concessionary travel card. And finally, in Northern Ireland, a senior smart pass, a registered blind smart pass, a war disablement smart pass, a 60 plus smart pass or a half fare smart pass. So if you're in England, then you can use an older person's bus pass, a disabled person's bus pass, an Oyster 60 plus card or a Freedom Pass for people over the age of 66. 6 of the government accepted IDs are specifically targeted at older people, while almost none are aimed at younger people, which you could, I think, reasonably construe as an argument in favour of ID cards, which Stephen Kinnock, the Shadow Immigration Minister, has mooted this morning. More of your thoughts, please, on 0345 6060 973. What do you think about the idea? And what do you think about Stephen Kinnock's expressed hope that it would actually assuage public reservations about so-called illegal immigration? Because you can answer those two questions quite differently, I think. Gary's in Peterborough. Gary, what would you like to say?
My opinion on the ID cards, I'm open to the whole situation, but what worries me mostly is the cost and where the cost will be coming from. As you've quite rightly been touching on the last couple of days with these refugee camps and how long they've been kept in them and the processing taking longer than it should. And some of your callers ringing in saying the extensive cost of keeping them in hotels daily. Now, I remember a report, I'm not going to go gospel on it, but I remember a report a while back that someone done, and it was about these immigrants that are coming over on boats